I've reviewed quite a few NAS devices over the last few years, and this includes a number from TerraMaster. The products they produce have been getting better and better, and this includes the build quality, the overall packaging, and the homegrown OS they run, TOS or TerraMaster OS. Now the new F4-425 Pro model released in the last week is significantly different because of what TerraMaster are offering in terms of AI capabilities. And I'm going to go into depth on what this really is and what it means in this video. AI can generate mixed emotions. There are some very interesting technology here, but there's also a lot of hype and BS, and of course AI has an element of toxicity around it due to what's happening with compute hardware pricing and availability. Some people are simply sick of hearing about AI, so maybe calling it an assistant is less repellent, but I think it does undersell what is really going on here in reality. It's certainly not Clippy for those that remember him. So we're going to look at the F4-425 Pro, the latest TOS 7 OS which has come out of beta and into GA, and see if this is a good choice for you if you're in the market for a NAS device. And I'm going to give you a pragmatic view of what it means and where it's heading in the NAS space, because I know some other established and new entrants are looking at releasing AI NAS products also. So first, let's look at the device, the hardware spec, and what the connectivity looks like. And then we can circle back to the new OS and what this AI part is all about, because that is actually really interesting. So let's start with a look at the build quality. Now, previous models had a plastic outer shell, but this new model comes with an aluminium case. Drive trays are very similar with toolless drive installation. There is a large fan at the rear to cool the internals, and historically TerraMaster have done a good job on their cooling solutions in their NAS devices. Now they use a standard 120mm fan and header, so I personally will likely replace it with a Noctua. Now this unit is the Intel N350 Twin Lake unit with 16GB of RAM. A little confusingly, there's also an F4-425 Pro unit which comes with the N305 Alder Lake chipset, and that comes with 8GB of RAM. Now this doesn't affect the ports on the unit here, as both of these come with the same 9 Gen 3 PCIe lanes. And we're going to come back to that, but bear in mind you're looking here at the N350 version. The power button is moved to the front, and this is a nice quality of life improvement over the previous generation, along with a USB 3.2 port that provides 10 gigabits per second, and it's easier to access. I would still really like the drive activity light and the bays to be more clearly numbered, and really having the activity light on the tray itself would be far better. Now if we look at the rear, there are two 5GB Ethernet interfaces which can be aggregated for 10 gigs of bandwidth. There's an HDMI out which will provide 4K video, and two more USB-A and USB-C also on the back, which also support 10 gigabits per second. And then there's the power connector to the external brick, and it appears to be the same one that TerraMaster have been using for some time. So overall, given the chipsets here, there is good connectivity here, and both the CPU types are based on mobile chipsets, so they're good for power efficiency, but they do have limits on PCI lane bandwidth, and of course there's no support for ECC memory. Now if we look inside the unit, there are also 3 NVMe slots, and there's also good space in here for use of heat sinks on these. As I install these, let's just talk about that chipset, because the limitation of 9 Gen 3 lanes means that there's not going to be a lot of fast lane access to those NVMe's, and this means that each of these 3 slots, they only get a single lane of Gen 3 bandwidth each. But I would say do not let this be a concern, because a single Gen 3 lane does give you around 8 gigabits per second of bandwidth, and that's already enough to almost saturate those two network interfaces. It could potentially limit bandwidth to storage for onboard processes that are running in VMs or containers, but if you're looking for faster storage or you want to run a lot of VMs, you may want to use something beefier like the F4-424 Max. Now this is an older model, it's a bit more expensive, but it does come with more grunt, and it can support 2 slots with 4 times Gen 4 lanes. I will link that unit also below along with a video review I did, but I use one of these for my VM and my Kubernetes environment, and honestly it's a fantastic device. So the main takeaway here is the NVMe slots are Gen 3 single lane only, so optimize for price and heat, not performance when you make your SSD selection. And I want to add at this point, by the way, that there are a few things that get a bit confusing in the TerraMaster range, and this is likely because they're in a transition between their 424 to the 425 model. So let me review what we see today on their site so you can consider all of this. Now firstly, this unit here is the F4-425 Pro. It's a 4-bay SATA plus 3 NVMe drive chassis with this new metal case. Comes with the Intel N350 or the N305 option. They both come with 8 cores and threads, 16 gigs and 8 gigs of RAM respectively. They have a single sodium slot. Now they claim support for a maximum of 32 gigabytes of RAM, And it has those two 5 gig Ethernet ports. Now you may actually be able to get 48 gigs of RAM into this because the N350 theoretically supports this if you have a pile of money under your bed, but this is not something I've tested. Then we have the F4-425 Pro model. Now this is also listed on the site as being a new release, but appears to come with the older plastic style case. Now this has a more powerful Raptor Lake i3-1350U CPU with 6 cores, 8 threads, 8 gigs of RAM. It comes with 2 SODIMM slots and a maximum supported RAM of 64 GB. Now due to the higher end chipset in this device, it provides 3 NVMe slots, 1 at 4x Gen 3 and 2 at 4x Gen 4. Also the same 2 times 5 gig network ports. Now the F4-425 Pro isn't positioned as an AI NAS like the F4 version for some reason, but ultimately it's going to be running the same OS. Then there is the previous generation F4-424 Pro, which comes in a 16 or a 32 GB model. Now this also uses the Intel N305 with 8 cores and threads, and this is the previous version to the 425 Pro, and it comes with 2 NVMe slots with each also having that single Gen 3 lane, and that one comes with 2.5 gig interfaces. So yep, I think a little bit confusing, but I think this is a transition period in their model releases, and of course we'll see what happens over the next few months. Now we talked about the hardware, let's get to the operating system, and I've been using the TerraMaster NAS devices from version 5 of their OS, and version 6 was certainly a slicker and better version. During my initial TOS 7 testing, I did run into some quirks with installs and upgrades, but having done a full factory reinstall a few days ago, it does seem smoother. I think it looks like the move to general availability has also maybe provided a clearer path for installs and upgrades. Overall, it certainly has a lot of similarities to TOS 6, and on the face of it, it feels like an evolution of the previous version. There are still some quirks. For example, I had after a reboot some services that needed to be re-enabled for some reason. So these are kinks that still need to be ironed out, but overall, again, it's increasingly a capable NAS OS, and the important basics such as disk, volume management, file sharing, they work just great. There's media center options, and there are lots of apps to choose from. TerraMaster also provide great options with the file system. Flexible RAID is included with T-RAID and T-RAID+. BTRFS provides options for snapshot and worm, or write once, read many file systems, and it provides capabilities like iSCSI, which have real use cases in video editing and are not supported by everyone. This device is positioned for creators with fast interfaces, and it has the option to use those SSDs for cache also. There are some subtle but nice improvements to the UI also. For example, the system monitoring has been revamped and it feels better, it's more complete. Storage Manager has been moved out of the control panel into its own dedicated Storage Manager application. Now I use a couple of my existing TerraMaster boxes extensively for hosting VMs, containers, and also containers in VMs, and though VirtualBox is a tried and tested piece of software, it comes with its own limitations and it does feel a bit clunky. What I'm really excited to see in this TOS version is there is now a native Linux KVM based utility simply called VMs. Now you can't use this at the same time as VirtualBox, so you'll need to pick one, but there are details provided on how to migrate existing VirtualBox VMs into KVMs if you're doing an upgrade. And because KVM has a native kernel integration, it's a Type 1 hypervisor rather than VirtualBox's Type 2, you're going to get better performance and reduced resource consumption also. And this is a reason to upgrade older TOS 6 NAS devices to TOS 7 also. And the Docker Manager app, that's also had a bit of a refresh and a few updates. And this brings me to another key point, and that is that though TOS 6 was based on standard Linux kernel, it required a bit of hackery and jailbreaking to get the OS to have full root access. Now with TOS 7, TerraMaster have aligned the OS to Ubuntu, allowing users to install standard Ubuntu packages, and they also provided a developer mode that you can select in the system settings. This gives you full root access. Now this is a huge, and for me at least, a much appreciated change, and given what we're going to get to in the next AI NAS topic, it was really handy because I was able to install some enterprise grade software to map out exactly what was coming and going from the box and lock it down to exactly what I wanted to permit. And this alone is a game changer for me with TOS 7. And on that topic, let's get to the subject of what AI NAS really means and what this enables you to do. But along with this is going to come a string of warnings, so let's get into that. First of all, let's start with what you may have expected from an AI NAS. So my initial expectation when I heard this was that they were jumping on the marketing bandwagon and it would be based on some capabilities that have been around a while, things like face recognition of your photos and tagging, location awareness from metadata so you can find photo locations easily. And it turns out that TOS and its photo app have actually been doing this for some time, maybe for 3 years or so. And this ML process runs on the NAS itself. Your photos do not need to leave the box for this process to happen. And this is what you're seeing here. Now I tested this against a public Kaggle dataset for ML training and it does a solid job. But this is not actually what TerraMaster mean by AI NAS, and this actually surprised me. And if you're not knee-deep in the current AI news storm, let me bring you up to speed on Openclaw, because this is central to what TerraMaster are doing here with this device. Now, Openclaw has been all over the tech sector news cycle for good and bad reasons. It's basically an AI agent that does work on your behalf. You run this yourself on your own device, and in the back end, they use LLMs or large language models, such as ChatGPT, to perform tasks independently. When Jensen Huang says that everyone will have an agent that does things for them, this is basically what it is. Be alarmed or inspired, for better or worse, this does seem to be the direction of travel. And what TerraMaster have done here is provide Openclaw as an optional module for their NAS in TOS 7. But above this, they've also included skills to teach Openclaw how to perform functions on the NAS natively. Now this is optional. You can just run this as a regular NAS if this is not for you. And this is very cool. But running an AI agent that can perform actions on the NAS does come with some considerations. And in the most extreme case, I think you should consider that anything that Openclaw has access to could become public. And anything that it has control over could be destroyed. There are certainly ways that you can configure Openclaw to make it more or less secure, but this is how I think about things with the current state of Openclaw. It's worth adding though that it's already far better than it was just a few months ago in terms of security. Now there's a lot more context that could be covered because Openclaw is a massive subject on its own, and I will almost certainly be spending time on this and doing some updates with additional content, but at a high level, here are some of the things that you should understand. Firstly, Openclaw doesn't cost anything, okay, to be clear. And TerraMaster don't receive any subscription revenue here. However, its reasoning and your interaction with it depends on having access to an LLM such as Anthropic's Opus, Google Gemini's 3 Flash, or Chinese models such as Qwen or Minimac. Your experience will vary somewhat depending on the model, but also the price, because you need to buy credits or a plan to use these. And once you do this, you configure the API key in Openclaw, and then it will use tokens to make requests to the model. Now, depending on what you want to do, you need to pick the right model, and you can configure Openclaw with multiple AI models so that it can use cheaper ones for day-to-day work and more expensive models for more complex objectives. There are also services like OpenRouter that will pass requests to different models based on the task and optimize this for you. Openclaw stores your state and context information locally on the NAS, and then you can use this across different models, and this means historical context can be used even if the tasks are run on different models at different parts in the process. Running it locally also then allows us to work directly on the NAS, and it will do some impressive things. For example, I asked it to analyze statistics on parkrun times. It worked out what parkrun was, it found the site, it went and worked out the API, pulled all the times, it then wrote a Python script that it could use to process the data, and then it produced a natural language summary and a graph of moving averages over periods of time. Better models will produce better results. They'll produce them more quickly, and they typically cost more. Now I use the Minimax M3 model here, and this is a good budget option that's still a highly capable model, and it's around $20 per month. I then configured Openclaw with a Telegram bot account, and I locked it down so only I can send it messages. Now I can perform actions like above, or even operations on my NAS from anywhere via Telegram. You can even ask Openclaw how to secure your Telegram access, and it will tell you how to do this, and it will do the configuration for you. And as another example here, I asked Openclaw to go look at my categorized photos and get me a list of who is there. I didn't give it any credentials to use the native TOS CLI, so it just went digging through the file system. It found where the app lived, it found the database, it opened the database, it ran some queries, and it gave me a list of names. And it also gave me some info on how many pictures are processed and not named yet, and these type of things. Now this process took around 5 minutes in reality, and I've sped it up a little bit here, but that's partly the model I'm using. But in the end, it gives me a list. And then I asked for a couple of random pictures of one of the names, and it gave them to me along with some stats and confidence in the matches. So you can see this is all very cool, and it's all doable via Telegram remotely also. But here is the thing. LLMs can hallucinate, and they can be confidently wrong. it may tell you exactly how to secure this interface, but it could be wrong about it. And if that channel isn't secure, then someone else could potentially message my assistant and ask it to do the same things that I can do. Use my tokens, read my files, destroy data on my NAS, send emails as me if I've given Openclaw access to email, which you can do if you choose to. So the rule of thumb is when doing research with AI is that it is powerful, but never assume it's correct. If the results of that research have consequences, then you should fact check them. If Openclaw has access to my email, it can help organize my mail, notify me of things that I need taken care of, filter spam, but it can also delete my emails. And there's the possibility of prompt injection attacks. And this is where the LLM reads some content, say from an email or from a web page, and instead of just considering it as data, it takes it as an instruction to take action. Prompt injection is a very real consideration when you're using LLMs. And this is the possible problem with the TOS skill and the native access. To access these, Claw needs credentials, and if you give it credentials, then that is context that could be passed to the LLM or potentially leaked. And this is where we get into things that you do need to be aware of. You can certainly do things to protect it, to limit how it can receive communication, but the balance that comes is that the more it can do for you, the more things that you should consider. You could indeed give it bank access, trading accounts. You can have it shop for you by asking for the best reviewed products and having it shipped directly to you at work. But then what could go wrong increases and the consequences potentially worsen. And I'm not telling you not to use Openclaw. It is truly fantastic, but take it at a pace you're comfortable with. And if you apply that logic I mentioned, that anything it has access to could become public and anything it can edit can be destroyed, I think you're on the right path. And if you're new to this, use it to automate non-critical tasks and save you time. I have it send me a Telegram reminder for all Football World Cup games 30 minutes before they start, which channel they're showing on, and include interesting context like who is in the starting lineup. And this is where I'm a little cautious about opening the gates on the AI NAS just yet. TerraMaster bakes this into the OS, so it really comes with privileged access to the NAS, its file system, its data. This provides huge flexibility and feature capability, but having it run in a container is probably a more robust approach that puts it in a more controlled sandbox. But then this is more complex. You would need to carefully configure where its working space is, where it can read from, what it can edit. But TerraMaster does provide all you need to do this also with its native Docker support. So if you're looking for a platform to learn this stuff on, the TerraMaster F4-425 Pro is probably really a great choice, but you do need to use your judgment and ease yourself into it, and always backups, always backups. And of course, if you don't enable Openclaw, that's fine also. This is an excellent NAS on its own right. It's got solid power and efficiency, and the new TOS 7 OS, even if there are a few bits of polish required, is an excellent step forward. And as Openclaw or similar projects progress, you can tip your toe in as much as you like. So let's get to my conclusions on this device, but before I do, please do hit the like button if this was informative or useful. I'm going to post affiliate links below to the NAS. There is a current offer linked to Prime Day over the next week or so from release of this video. So do also consider a subscribe, by the way. Check out my other content. I cover NAS and storage especially, but I also very likely am going to cover more on Openclaw with this NAS going forward. And I'm also sure there's going to be more AI NAS devices coming to market, which I may cover. And again, as always, thank you for all the support. So let's summarize. Firstly, putting aside the AI NAS topic, this is an excellent NAS in terms of hardware, build quality, and the NAS OS. TerraMaster have been making really good progress in the last few years in the NAS space, and they're rapidly establishing themselves with great products. I've reviewed several others of their NAS devices, including the hybrid storage and some of their NVMe NAS options, and the hardware, cooling and pricing generally seems really solid. TOS 7 brings some good improvements. It has a slicker user experience, added functionality, and an ever-growing application store. They provide good productivity tools and a range of backup and data sync capabilities also, and they do an excellent job with utilities if you're building a home lab. Baseline NAS capability is now really solid, with the basics working well, but also features like T-RAID and T-RAID Plus providing flexibility and disk sizes that you can use and upgrade with. TOS 7 itself comes with improvements around VM and container management, also something that I use extensively in my home lab. I run a TerraMaster F4-424 Max with 96 gigs of RAM here for my primary VM and Kubernetes environments, and I think it's an excellent piece of hardware. Then there is the new Openclaw integration, which is really groundbreaking for a NAS, but comes with some warnings. It's simple to get running, relatively speaking, considering its power. So the risk with this, and AI I think more generally, is that capabilities like coding and tooling become far more accessible to the masses, but being easy enough to get yourself in trouble is also a risk. Making these tools accessible is great, right? And I encourage experimentation, but you do need to be thoughtful and understand what could go wrong. And though this is a NAS marketed as the AI NAS, I'm sure there will be other models released, and you can always go install TOS 7 on older TerraMaster NAS models also. Remember that the heavy lifting here is not done by Openclaw, but by the model it's using. So the mobile CPU in this box is completely fine, doesn't draw too much power, and you do not need GPUs to run Openclaw. And of course, if you don't like TOS and you want to run your own OS, like TrueNAS or Proxmox, then you can absolutely do that. And remember that TerraMaster's primary use case here is to use Openclaw to help automate use of the NAS itself. You can use it for so much more, but just managing the NAS isn't particularly risky if you don't expose Openclaw to anyone else via channels like Telegram, Signal, or email. So, thank you for watching to the end. I really hope there were some things here to learn. Hope you're interested in the device and what I've told you. Good luck on your NAS and your Openclaw journey, and of course, I will see you in the next.